Thank you for all that are attending today. It's incredible to see so many faces out there. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Tracy Hedderly, and I am the Tech Center Recruiting Site Lead for JP Morgan Chase in Columbus, Ohio, and been with the company for 8 years. The bulk of my role is managing the recruiting portion of all hires in technology in Columbus. And then I'm also have a huge responsibility for our DE&I activities, our candidate pipeline, our build out, our strategy, working with the community, etc. I'm very excited to be here today. This is something that is very important to me and a passion of mine. So happy to see all of you. I just want to talk about a little bit today on what we're hoping to gain, and that's tips on how your company can respond to current challenges and be part of the larger conversation with respect to DE&I. And I think it's very important to continue these types of conversations. Always it's important and should be front of mind, but even more so with the current environment that we're in, the challenges that we face, even more important to always be thinking about it, have the conversation continue, and not to just be checking a box, if you will, not to just have another program that we're implementing or another training that we do and assign and maybe forget about, but something that's ongoing and that we're continually talking about, thinking about, and hopefully as we move forward, that this is something that becomes second nature to us, that it's not just the training, it's not just the program. So, programs like today, I think are very important and need to continue. With that said, I'd also like to thank JP Morgan Chase and Accenture for being sponsors today. Thank you to Level for planning this. Incredible opportunity. And with that, I would like to introduce our panelists for today. We have 3 incredible leaders in diversity, equity, and inclusion that are here with us. We have Priscilla Hammonds, that is Assistant Vice President in Diversity Inclusion Community Relations at Grange Insurance. We have Justin Foster. He's the Chief Diversity Officer at DLL Office Group. And then we have, last but not least, Dr. Marlon Monroe, who is the President of Marlon Moore Consulting. And I would like to now turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves in just a brief introduction. So Priscilla, I'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Tracy, and good afternoon to all. Thank you so much for being here and wanting to engage in this conversation. Again, Priscilla Hammonds, I lead diversity and inclusion community relations at Grange. I've been a diversity and inclusion practitioner for over 15 years. My background has been insurance. I grew up in the insurance industry. I'm a native of Ohio, Ohio State Buckeye alum. I got my MBA from Ohio Dominican. And again, last but not least, I'm also the president of the Central Ohio Diversity Consortium. So if you want a little information about that, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Justin?
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Justin Foster. I serve as Chief Diversity Officer at DLL Group. We're a global financial services company. We exist in over 30 countries. I'm relatively new to DE&I. I just took this Chief Diversity Officer role in August, and so I'm a couple of months in, but I've been in HR my whole career, spanning from HR business partner to talent acquisition, learning and development, talent management, the whole gamut. I am based in Charlotte, North Carolina, with my wife and 2 boys. And then from an industry perspective, I've worked in financial services, obviously, education, specialty chemicals, and defense.
Thank you, Justin. And Marlon?
Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here. Priscilla and Justin, happy to share on this panel with you all today. As was mentioned, I'm Dr. Marlon Moore, president of Marlon Moore Consulting. I've been in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space for about 15 years now. Started out in supplier diversity and formerly was the chief diversity and inclusion officer for Huntington Bank. So as a part of my practice, I like to work with corporations of all sizes, for-profit, nonprofit organizations, and establishing a baseline for diversity, equity, and inclusion, developing a strategic plan, which is very important for executing, then providing ongoing services to help them along their journey. So glad to be here this morning, see a lot of familiar names and faces, and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. And so we'll start with our questions. We have a few different questions that we're going to ask, and I'll more so go round robin with all of the panelists. And starting with you first, Justin, wanted to ask, how have the events of 2020 impacted diversity activities in your workplace or community? And how do you continue to promote and derive the importance of DE&I long after the news cycle ends?
Yeah, so I think we can all agree that 2020 has been a wild year all across the globe. And I think the word that comes to mind for me is fatigue. I think people are really tired. It's been a long, rough year for many people. And at DLL, we've really put an emphasis on personal well-being of our employees and really making sure that regardless of what people are maybe struggling with, we're giving them the grace and space to deal with that. For me personally, 2020, as I mentioned, was the year that I committed to DE&I work as something I wanted to do full time and become a practitioner like my fellow panelists. And I think what's most important when it comes to thinking about DE&I work is recognizing that this is not a one and done solution, that we'll have to continue to amplify voices long after the news cycles die down. And the work is too important for us to stop when we feel like we're making progress, because I think that is an inclination as we're making progress, we start to slow down. We can't stop at rhetoric. And what I've seen is over the last couple of months, a lot of companies come forward and talk, have a big talk and big rhetoric. But we need to, as DE&I professionals, we need to make sure that our companies don't just stop at that rhetoric and they move forward towards results. I think we owe that to our underrepresented clients, associates, and employees.
Thank you. Marlon, do you have anything to contribute?
Sure, and Justin, I think those are really great points. 2020 has just been a challenge across the board. I'm reminded of when COVID-19 hit, ironically enough, a lot of diversity and inclusion initiatives were put on the back burner. There's a lot of focus on well-being, and just, rightfully so. But with the recent events and social unrest, it has definitely come to the forefront. And I think what organizations have to continue to do is focus on the why. That can't get lost. Oftentimes we talk about the business case for diversity and inclusion, but I think it's going deeper than that in today's society. There has to be more of a intrinsic purpose. Is diversity and inclusion really about just numbers? No. It's about making sure folks have a seat at the table, they feel empowered. It's about internal partnerships with talent acquisition, compensation, purchasing. It's a real collective effort at the organizational level, but also at the individual level to really move things forward. So, I think we have to remain diligent. We have to be thought leaders in this space. We have to continue to push the envelope. What matters to your organization? Is it representation? Is it development of talent? All those things need to continue to be defined. So there's so much more work to do, but I'm really glad to see that DE&I is where it is as far as conversations in the community. And I'm glad to see more organizations taking it seriously.
And I will add to that, and I'll speak to it from a human factor perspective. Of course, I agree with everything that Justin and Marlon have shared in terms of, giving our employees the grace and the space, right, to just deal with all the challenges that all of us are facing. Yet also understanding that, DE&I does impact every aspect of the business. But when I think about it from a human factor perspective, where I'm going with that is thinking about the fact that because of what happened with George Floyd and the protests and just all of the social unrest, there was a critical need for associates in all organizations to pause and have conversations about what happened, because it impacted them, it affected them. And so they were bringing their feelings and emotions to the workplace. And when you think about that, that can have an impact on an associate's ability to perform, to make decisions, to lead, et cetera, et cetera. So when I think about it from a human factor perspective, I also think about it from the standpoint of there was an increased sense of urgency to have conversations, and not just conversations, but uncomfortable conversations about race. And so through that, I think what we have discovered at Grange, and I think many others can relate to it, is the fact that we have been put in a space to learn new things, maybe to unlearn some things, and maybe to relearn things when it comes to leading, when it comes to building relationships, and not just relationships, but authentic relationships, specifically with people across differences. So that's what I would add to that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Priscilla.
Sure.
And completely agree with that. And it isn't always easy, and it can be uncomfortable. And that's why we need to continue having the conversations and moving forward. So, with that, and I'll start with you, Priscilla, what do you believe the biggest roadblocks what do you think the biggest roadblocks are currently to DE&I?
So some of the roadblocks that I'm going to mention currently have been some of the same roadblocks that have already existed. And that's simply, there are many that don't understand the business value of diversity and inclusion, even though there's plenty of research by McKinsey and Korn Ferry and many other organizations, that can clearly show that companies who implement diversity and inclusion strategies yield, better profits, better stock market rates, things of that nature. So that's one of the things, just still that need for some to understand the business case. Also, if you don't have a CEO and C-suite members who understand the business case, but are also willing to actually lead and motivate and be committed, to driving the organization to do things differently. When I say that, I mean applying that diversity lens to all aspects of their business, in addition to showing what it means to be an inclusive leader, especially in these difficult times. That can be a roadblock. And also the last thing I'll say is sometimes diversity and inclusion is viewed as an HR only initiative or a leader only initiative. And the reality is that everyone plays a role in helping to create what a diverse and inclusive organization looks like, whether they're a C-suite or whether they're an intern. So those are some of the roadblocks.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I could weigh in, I would say, how do we get those resistant members of our organizations, sometimes leaders and managers in positions of responsibility? How do we get them to buy in? How do we involve those who say, they don't have time? And I think it's really helping leaders to understand that diversity and inclusion are table stakes. Equity and belonging are true breakthroughs in the organization, and leaders and insiders can use their influence to make others feel included, respected, and safe as they open up the space for everyone to have a voice. I think this builds people up and it brings people together. It unlocks, conversations and brings a journey of exploration and humanity. There's also the business case, as Priscilla mentioned. We know that diverse teams are more innovative. We know that more diverse companies are outpacing their competitors. When we bring these things to the forefront, we realize we can't ignore these things and we have to make time. And I would also say, from an organizational standpoint, it's showing that inclusion and inclusive leadership gets you to the next level in your organization. Make it a table stake to get to that next level, to get that promotion for leaders in the organization. Then that will drive accountability with your leadership teams.
Yeah, and I think Justin and somebody sent Justin and Priscilla a copy of my notes because they both touched on it, the business case, accountability. So I guess I'll take it to a more strategic point of view, a more tactical point of view. I think many of the roadblocks still exist with collaboration. Unfortunately, the D&I professionals carry the D&I mantle within their companies. We're looking for diverse talent, so reach out to the diversity team. We're looking for diverse suppliers, reach out to the diversity team. But there are so many more people and business units that have to be held accountable. There has to be strategic collaboration, I mentioned earlier, with additional partners in HR, like talent acquisition. You have to leverage groups like comp and benefits to really figure out what plans, what programs are in place that promotes inclusion. You have to leverage partners in purchasing, business owners who are able to help provide products and services that strengthen organizations. All of those factors have to converge to really begin to see movement. And then, like was mentioned earlier by Priscilla and Justin, there has to be accountability. We can no longer just say, diversity and inclusion isn't important without including metrics, strategic metrics, including very clear goals and performance reviews. And if folks are not meeting the goals that are set or accountability metrics that are set, there needs to be some conversations that happen behind that. So we have to do a lot better, I think, in working together to move the needle. So shared accountability is the term I like to use.
Very good, and appreciate that, especially the accountability piece. And with that, Marlon, what advice would you give to organizations that are just starting their DE&I journey?
Yeah, so I would say you really have to assess where you are along the diversity, equity, and inclusion continuum. Organizations start at different places. Some, quite honestly, don't even have a policy statement today. So you want to assess where you are with your retention programs. How are you developing leaders? How do you approach recruitment? So once you do the assessment, get a baseline of where you are, then it's important to develop an actual plan. Your operating plan should have strategic objectives that serve as the roadmap for execution. So whether or not you want to focus on community engagement, research, supplier diversity, workforce diversity, all of those strategic objectives really provide the framework for execution. And then you want to make sure you have human capital. I really encourage companies to hire someone who is responsible for leading, not owning all D&I efforts, but leading D&I efforts. There are a number of, if you don't want to hire someone internally, there are a number of organizations such as Marlon Moore Consulting, shameless plug there, that can support those efforts. But you want to have somebody who wakes up every day and their purpose is to make sure that the organization is focused. And then, as I said before, you want to measure it. What is important to your organization? Is it new hires? Is it promotions? Is it senior level diverse talent? And you measure those things, and you communicate successes. That's another part. And you leverage the resources internally, like business resource groups or employee resource groups. Your colleagues have a lot of wonderful ideas and can help substantiate your workplace culture.
So Tracy, I'd like to, add to what Marlon just shared, because again, I think it's important to start with why is D&I important to your business? Why is it important to you as a CEO? Why is it important to your team? And how does it, help innovation, flourish within your organization? The one thing that I did want to comment on in terms of what Marlon said around, hiring someone to help lead and drive the work, yes, that is very, very important. Not only hiring someone, but, having a team. Again, going back to that human capital to really help that organization, further its diversity and inclusion journey. But I want to point out something, when it comes to hiring someone, right? So when companies are looking to hire a D&I professional to come in and lead the work, it's not solely just hiring a person of color or a woman or someone from the LGBTQ community, et cetera, et cetera. It has to be someone who has great communication skills, is a strategic thinker, has business savvy, has personal savvy, great relationship building skills, kind of understands the business, knows how to navigate through complex, cultures. And again, is authentic in their ability to, present an opposing point of view, with tact and diplomacy. So it can't be someone that's kind of on their own personal mission to try to right a wrong. So that's what I wanted to add.
Love that. And, the next question I was going to ask, and I think you alluded to that a little bit, Priscilla, is, what advice would you give to allies that want to get involved in DE&I initiatives? So I don't know, Justin or Marlon, if you have anything to add to that.
And so an ally obviously is very different than, a D&I professional. So.
Yeah, true.
Sure. I would say one of the key pillars of our D&I strategy is to create allyship in the organization, and so create opportunities for allyship. And what we've done first is build an allyship academy where individuals can first take the time to educate themselves before they engage in what we also call daring dialogues, or other people call courageous conversations, or things like that. Because I think it's really important that the individual who is identifying as an ally understands what that means. There's a job description. There's work. You got to do the work if you want to be an ally. And it's not just checking a box and getting a trophy and that you put on your mantle. There's work that's involved every single day to be an ally. It's an active role. So we really think it's important that the individual first educates themselves on the area of allyship they're wishing to engage in. And being an ally for one group while not being an ally for all groups. So understanding the challenges and the struggles of the Black community is not the same as those with differing abilities. And so understanding that is important, and understanding that you're going to be asked to do real work in the organization if you choose to be an ally. And that's great. That's a rewarding work. That's work that will invigorate your life in great ways. But do know that there is a responsibility that you have from an allyship standpoint.
Yeah, those are all great points. And I would kind of piggyback on what Justin said and just, simply say, get in the game. Spend time with colleagues that are different from you, that have a different viewpoint, have conversations that may make you feel uncomfortable because that leads to learning. Take on leadership roles, not just join a affinity group, take on a leadership role, help remove roadblocks, help to change policy. And be willing to mentor. I know we talk about this a lot, mentorship and sponsorship, but the reality is, for change to happen, someone has to speak up, someone who's in a position of power, in a position of influence. And so when allies use their voice to help drive the business case, when they use their voice to talk about how diversity, equity, and inclusion drives performance, those words matter and they resonate throughout your enterprise. So get involved, get active, have a voice, be a resource. And again, I'll go back to what I shared earlier, is be collaborative. You don't have, as Priscilla mentioned, you don't have to be in HR to do this work. You can be in the finance department or the technology department, but there's still hiring going on. There's still development that needs to occur. So we all have a role to play, and it's important that, again, we understand why it's important and what steps we can take to be active.
And Tracy, I'll just add one thing. When I think about allyship, and this is through actual experience, and having conversations specifically with Caucasians, when we've had some open, honest conversations about race, racism, discrimination. Being an ally is a big part of that is listening, and listening to try and understand, one's perspective. It's not about, an ally being defensive, or even apologizing, for things that, happened many, many years ago, but listening and trying to understand how racism, discrimination, unfair treatment has impacted human beings from a health, a wealth, an educational, mental well-being perspective, et cetera, et cetera. So being a good listener is a really big part of allyship.
Yeah, Tracy, there's a really good book by Karen Caitlin called Better Allies. I would encourage folks to pick that up and read it. And it really talks about, to sort of Priscilla's point, listening. And I would encourage everybody, don't go talk to the Black person just because they're Black. Do some research on your own, but really sit down, as Priscilla said, and seek first to understand, listen intently, build relationships. It's all about relationships. So again, Better Allies by Karen Caitlin is a really good read.
And one more thing I'll add, because people of color, it's important for us to be allies, right, with Caucasians. And so it's important for us to do the exact same, listen, try to understand. A quick example I have is having a conversation with a senior leader who was a white male, and he and I had a conversation about white privilege. And I didn't understand at the time why white privilege was an offensive term to whites for some. But through conversation with him, he gave me, a different perspective that allowed me to say, oh, okay, that makes sense. So, it's important for both parties to be in that mode of really listening to try to understand, even when, a viewpoint may be just extremely, the opposite of yours.
Agree, like seek to understand. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So last thing I would like to ask all of you, and maybe I'll start with Priscilla and we can go from there. What are some of the programs that you've put in place in your organization to improve DE&I and that other organizations might be able to implement as well?
Sure. So I'll quickly try to list some of the things that we've done at Grange Insurance, starting with, back in the summer when the city of Columbus declared racism a public health crisis, and the Columbus City Council asked all of the business leaders to sign on to that resolution. Grange and many other companies did that. But, once we did that, I said, okay, we really have to make sure that we have actions and strategies in place to support that public statement. So that's, I don't know if that's actually a program, but it's, something that was done. Number two, revisiting our philanthropy, looking at who we are giving to, with what I call a diversity lens, and specifically giving dollars to, organizations who support, efforts to eliminate racism and poverty and things of that nature. Another thing we did was we created conversations of understanding, where our CEO and myself, we facilitated a conversation about race, with our senior leaders. And then from that, I created a discussion guide that could be used by leaders so that they could facilitate that conversation of understanding, with their departments or their teams. I also promoted that guide to say, while you're using this guide to have this uncomfortable conversation about race, you can also use the guide to have uncomfortable conversations about other topics that, create a lot of division. The last thing I'll mention real quick is we also created a diversity and inclusion website of resources focused on racism and allyship, how to be anti-racist, white privilege, et cetera, so that our associates, could go out, gain, gather some of those resources and again, do their own self-education around racism and the different challenges that many people of color face. So I'll stop there. There's plenty more, but I'll stop so that Justin and Marlon can chime in.
Sure, I'll jump in next. So about a year and a half ago, our CEO signed the I Act On pledge, which I think many of our peers have done as well. But that kind of set us on a journey of, our CEO said, we're gonna do something. We're not gonna just talk. So we've done things like we've set up an executive inclusion council that are my main counterpoints as the chief diversity officer, that they're really driving the strategy. I'm leading them, but they're driving the strategy. They're the mouthpieces of what we're trying to do in the organization. They've been seated for about a year. Like I mentioned, we hired a chief diversity officer. We've done something similar to Priscilla. We call them daring dialogues in the organization, where we both do them publicly and privately, where we encourage managers to do them in their teams, but we also decide, what are some concepts we need to have a conversation all across the organization. And so we had one around race, we had one around non-binary pronouns and the importance of using someone's required pronouns. We've done them in a number of ways. I would say though, because I saw a question in the chat, these are things that our organizations needed to do, but it's important to understand where your organization is and don't bite off too much. Don't try to boil the ocean. I think making sure that your organization, you're keeping in lockstep with the tone of your organization, the culture you're trying to drive, and not try to drive too fast. Be really, really clear about what the message and what the strategy is, what's coming down from your CEO, and what is your why that Marlon talked about a little bit earlier. Because if you're not clear on your why, some of these tools and resources that we're telling you will blow up in your face. So be really, really clear about what you're trying to drive and on what schedule is good for your organization.
And I'll just quickly chime in, Justin, I'm so glad you said that, because often we are invited to webinars or meetings to talk about best practices, right? And I remember one of the first lessons I learned early in my career as a D&I professional is that a best practice for DLL is not necessarily a best practice for Grange Insurance. So yes, it is very, very important, to make sure that the initiatives that you implement, fit with your organization's values and missions, and again, helps drive the business.
Yeah. And I would say one of the things that I've seen work extremely successful, and we had a great run at my former employer, was through our employee resource groups. Our business resource groups is what we call them. Those groups were really empowered to make change within the organization. So you have diversity. Representation is important. But when you think about retaining talent, what does the workplace feel like? Does it feel inclusive? Are leaders modeling through inclusive leadership behaviors? And so our BRGs, Business Resource Group, really took that to heart and really did some phenomenal things like the establishment of meditation and prayer rooms. They also, our Veterans Business Resource Group was responsible for the review and revisement of our deployment benefits for colleagues. Our LGBTQ Business Resource Group was responsible for the organization even tracking its spend with LGBTQ diverse business owners. So when we empower those groups, those colleagues, to get engaged, change happens. And I remember one of the things that I was most proud of prior to my departure and starting my own consulting firm is we actually, as a part of our colleague engagement survey, we measured diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we saw over a 14-point increase over the course of my time there. And the three most commonly words used to describe the organization were diverse, welcoming, and inclusive. What that suggests to me is that the workplace culture, the engagement from our business resource groups, mind you, who met with the CEO twice a year to go over their business plans and help get support with removing roadblocks, that just really changed the overall culture and feel. And so I would encourage everyone to, as Priscilla said, do what works for you, understand your level of organizational readiness, but don't be afraid to be bold. Come up with ideas that will really have a significant impact and change the culture of your company.
Thank you. So if there's nothing else to add, we have a number of questions and a short period of time left to get to all of them. I will say right now, if we don't get to your question, I'll give instructions at the end how you can submit your question and we will respond back with an answer. So for the first question to start, and it is from Diana Abercrombie. I'm thinking maybe Diana at Abercrombie, but the question is, many companies say that the middle or frontline leader is often missed in the D&I development and accountability process. What are some ideas or guidance you would give to reach this level in an organization?
So I'll start. I think one of the biggest, most impactful ways to make sure that frontline leaders and middle managers are engaged in D&I work is going back to something we talked about earlier, is having a performance objective that's tied to diversity and inclusion. this year at Grange, we added a diversity and inclusion objective, and it's been cascaded down, to other levels of leadership. So there's kind of an even playing field in terms of, all leadership being held accountable for, creating a diverse and inclusive workforce. The other thing I'll mention is diversity and inclusion education and or training, whatever you want to call it. Implementing a learning strategy specifically for leaders. And that's something that we've done at Grange over the years where, every quarter during an all management meeting, we will, have a topic about diversity and inclusion. And sometimes that topic is tied back to an actual course, whether it was a one-day, in-person training or an e-learning module that we've required all of our leaders to take. And we, monitor that to ensure that all the leaders have completed that training. So those are some ways to engage and hopefully start to see, some actual movement within those leadership levels.
I would just add one small thing to what Priscilla said. One of our pillars of our strategy is to build inclusive leaders. And so I think it's built using that as a separate stakeholder group of your D&I strategy as you're building it out, because your middle management has different needs than your senior management. And so when you're building your learning journeys or membership journeys, as we call them, you're going to want to be specific about what are the needs of that constituent group. And I would recommend doing listening sessions with that group specifically, so you can understand how do you bring them along in the journey of DE&I.
And I would just add briefly, conduct road shows. So, get out across your organization and share the message and take partners with you. I see my good friend Tom Poole out here, who's a talent acquisition leader. He and I would go out together and have a joint message across the enterprise and share the work and why it was important. To Priscilla's point, if you have diversity metrics, you want to cascade those down. You want to share your monthly report. You want to share your progress within the enterprise. And then the third thing I would say is get middle management leaders engaged in any internal advisory council you have. So not just being a member, but have them responsible for delivering outcomes and have them report those out on a quarterly basis.
And just one quick thing I'll add to that is over in 2019 and up through 2020, we did some implicit buying or unconscious buying training, bias training specifically for leaders tied to the selection process, the interviewing process, because we wanted those leaders to, gain understanding around how unintended biases, could create, unintended, opportunities for applicants and especially, those of color.
Thank you.
Sure.
Next question is from John Fulton. I work intensively and individually with students in a coding bootcamp program as an instructor. What are the items that should be on my checklist to ensure that students from unrepresented groups have the greatest chance of success?
It's a great question. The first thing I would think about is what's the representation of the instructors? Do the students see someone who looks like them? Are they having conversations that are familiar to them, comfortable to them? Then the other thing I would add is what is the curriculum and who has reviewed that for any potential bias that may exist? So, representation of the instructors and review of the curriculum to check for any biased language terms that may make someone feel uncomfortable and become disengaged would be important.
I think what I would add to that is, as you're interacting with the students, be sure to reinforce that they matter and that they're smart and that they're capable of, achieving anything that they want to achieve. And, be open, to the questions that they have, answer them to the best of your ability. If you can't, find someone that can answer those questions. And as those students complete or graduate through the program, maybe there's an opportunity for those students to come back and help mentor or coach some of the, other students that will be coming up through the program.
One other follow-up just quick. I'm sorry, one other follow-up just quickly. Can the presence of mentorship from mentors who look like me offset some of the challenge that we face in our instructor pool, which at this point isn't as diverse as we would like it to be?
Yeah, John, I think that's a great point. I highly encourage, and Priscilla, you hit it on the head. I highly encourage to pair them with a mentor in the industry that can support them along the journey. I think that is a phenomenal idea. And actually, I've seen it happen in my personal life, where actually my sister has recently started a coding boot camp, or will be soon. And she had no clue about the industry until someone in technology here in Columbus introduced her to it and walked her through the process and encouraged her, supported her, and is serving as a mentor to her as she starts that journey. So I think, John, that's a very valid point.
Thank you. Next question. What are some of the examples of pushback received from some initiatives you've tried to push forward during your career in DE&I?
So I'll start with, and not necessarily at the company I work for now, but in a previous life that I had, the topic of requiring a diverse slate for all candidates was presented. And the pushback was a statement that was made, which still gets under my skin to this day, when a leader said, "So are you asking us to lower the qualifications because you're asking for a diverse slate?" And my response back was, I would never ask any leader to not hire the best candidate based on their skill set. And so I share that example because often when diverse slates are mentioned, the word qualified is always attached to it. Qualified diverse candidates, qualified minority candidates. And I just ask everyone on this call to pause and think about, when you're talking about candidates in general, or when you're talking about non-diverse candidates, do you use the word qualified? So that's an example of an initiative where there was pushback. The idea that asking for a diverse slate meant lowering the qualifications for the job.
That's powerful.
No, there's never any roadblocks. This is like, you get up, you go to work, everything happens the way you think it is every day. But I've seen pushback, and this is really in my role as a consultant. There's had to be intense conversation about setting accountability metrics. Every organization is not ready to do that as it relates to workforce, promotions, so on and so forth. But as we all know, what gets measured gets done. So those accountability metrics need to be in place to ensure progress. That's how you determine how you move the needle. And I would also add that the diverse slates does come up quite a bit. You can hear it. Legal has had, legal departments really have a challenge with that sometimes. So the language has to be spot on, requiring diverse slates and or not. But if you think about it, if you have 0 out of 5 candidates who are diverse, you're going to have a 0% chance of hiring somebody who's diverse. And so when you want to promote accountability in this space, it is important to look at the slates and determine, where are you reaching talent? How are you grooming talent inside of the organization? So unfortunately, that's definitely been a roadblock that has required additional conversations.
Mm-hmm. And, also just adding to that, a pushback is, well, we can't find diverse talent. And my question is, well, where are you looking? If you continue to look in the same places, then you're not going to find diverse talent. So then, over time, that leads to having conversations around, okay, where can we find diverse talent? So then the question is, are you partnering with historically Black colleges and universities? Are you partnering with diverse professional organizations such as the National Black MBA or Prospanica, which used to be the National Hispanic Society of MBAs? Are you partnering with NABA, right? The National Association of Black Accountants, et cetera, et cetera. So, there's usually diverse talent out there. It's just a matter of pausing and doing some research, and reaching out through your network to find where you can source for diverse talent.
And just real quick, I'll add, one of my biggest challenges is, DLL is a global company. Less than 50% of our workforce is actually in the US. And so thinking about DE&I from a global context, thinking about it from, Latin America to Europe, to Asia Pacific, to the US, it takes a lot to understand that when you say one word, even if you say white privilege, that's going to mean a lot of things that's different across the globe. And so I've spent a lot of the first couple of months of my time in my role really trying to understand. I think someone said it earlier, seek to understand first, understanding the concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion across our 30 different offices, which I think is important. I think it centers you, it grounds you, it gives you a lot of humility. Because even when you think like you understand from a DE&I standpoint what it looks like in the US, the context is very different. And I think you keep that same learning lens on when you talk about other intersections of diversity. So I think having that learning mentality is really, really important as you think about the space that we're practicing.
And the other thing I'll add real quickly about diverse slates is, there are some industries where, yes, it is a challenge to find diverse talent, but that doesn't mean that you give up, right? You continue to look for talent. And then also many companies are starting to, help build pipelines of talent, right? By going back and partnering with middle schools and high schools, right? And introducing those students to different industries that they may not have ever thought of, insurance being one of them. So if you're not able to find diverse talent, then, I would recommend you consider, partnering with some colleges or high schools and universities to help start building a pipeline for that diverse talent.
Thank you. I think we have time for maybe just one more question. And it's broad, so feel free to chime in. How did your career and experience lead and transition you into your current D&I roles?
So I'll start. Way back in the early 2000s, the company I was working for at the time had gotten some information indicating that, Blacks didn't feel like they were getting, equal opportunities. So that led to focus groups, being done with many different pockets of associates within the organization. From there, once those findings were, compiled and shared back to the organization, then the organization said, okay, we need to form a diversity and inclusion committee. So I joined the committee, later chaired the committee, and then the company decided to create a director of diversity role. I then took on that role, and, then from there was able to become a diversity consultant, which has now led me to my current role as AVP.
Yeah, and I'd say for me, I used to manage a group home for teenage abuse and neglect youth. And after working 365 days a year, I decided for a change, got my master's in diversity management, started out in supplier diversity, became the chief diversity officer. And then one of the things I realized after doing serving as the chief diversity officer for 8 years, I wanted to get out and help hundreds of companies really change their representation and then create an environment where all colleagues feel empowered and all colleagues have a seat at the table. And so that's why I launched Marlon Moore Consulting actually 4 months ago. And it's been one of the best decisions I've made in my professional career because the impact that I'm able to have across industries, across the country has just been priceless. So.
Yeah, and I made the switch just a couple of months ago, but I'll say, I've been in HR my whole career, so just about 10 years. And I've worked and I've advocated for diversity in all of the different roles that I've been in. And even if you would have asked me a year ago if I thought I was going to be a DE&I practitioner, I probably would have said no. But I think if you think about all of the things that have happened this year, all of the things that have impacted me personally, anyone personally on this call, this was the right choice for me personally. And I will say, I talked to my CHRO on Monday and I said, I have felt more joy, passion, challenge in the last 4 months that I've been a DE&I practitioner than I probably have in the 10 years that I've been in HR. And that for me, this has been a rewarding transition. It's something that I'm not sure when I'll leave and do something else, but I'm really enjoying what I'm doing today and it's making a big impact.
Thank you. And I fibbed. We actually have time for one more question.
Great.
So just to wrap it up, the last question. I'm doing DE&I workshops for a national organization. Many are open, but I have one who feels these trainings might be divisive. How do you address this? Like the issue of, I don't see color, ?
So I'm big on just creating reality and dealing with reality. And I say that from the standpoint of an example that I have where I was talking to a senior leader about having a conversation about race. And her comment was, well, I don't want people to feel uncomfortable. And I said, people are going to feel uncomfortable talking about race. That's just the dynamic. That's just where we are. And so to this person that, is interacting with someone who views the trainings as, divisive, I wouldn't shy away from, yes, there may be moments where they are divisive, but hopefully through those, moments, there will be some huge learnings. And as I mentioned, learnings, relearning or unlearning of some things that we as humans, need to do so that in the bigger scheme of things, we are creating a community and a world where when differences are presented on the table, we have some tools to be able to effectively interact and get past those differences so that, we can get to a common goal of making more money for the company or ensuring that every associate that works for this organization feels like they have, an equal opportunity to be successful, no matter who they are and no matter what they look like.
Yeah, so I'll say I try to couch dissension in the business context. And so when someone says, I don't see color, I don't see difference, I would say, well, how would that work out if we served our customers in that way? Not well. So how do we humanize and have the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion in a case that we can feel inclusive about it? So let's have the conversation. Let's lean in. You're going to be uncomfortable. I'm going to be uncomfortable too. Get to a place where you can have bold, inclusive, authentic conversations. But really, I start and I couch whatever the objection is in the business context first. And we wouldn't run our business that way. So why should we treat our people that way?
One just quick thing I'll share is because of what's happened this year, it has brought to light the importance for all of us to practice having uncomfortable conversations. That's the only way that we as humans are going to be able to get to a better place, to be able to face that challenge of having that uncomfortable conversation or dealing with, people viewing this training as divisive. We just have to get in the habit and practice of having uncomfortable conversations. It's going to make all of us better.
And I just say simply, if you want to get the best out of me as an employee, as a colleague, we need to create a space where I can thrive, where I can be my authentic self. And I think these topics and discussions create that.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our panelists. Great information. Thank you for everybody that's attended, to our sponsors, Accenture, JP Morgan Chase. To the attendees, we didn't get to all the questions clearly, but if you would like your question answered, please feel free to submit it. Go to leveldi.com and click contact us if you have additional questions. We'll be happy to respond back. You'll also receive a brief survey. If you could please fill that out and let us know what we can do differently, what we did well. Very appreciative of that. And thank you to Level for sponsoring and putting on this town hall.